I've been using Airbnb for business trips for over 6 years, staying in dozens of properties across the country. What happened during my week-long stay in Millfield, California last October made me question everything I thought I knew about trusting strangers with access to where you sleep. I'm a software consultant who travels frequently for client meetings. I'd booked what looked like the perfect remote work setup through Airbnb, a modern 2-story house on Pine Road, advertised as completely private with no neighbors nearby, featuring high-speed internet and a dedicated home office. The listing had professional photos showing a contemporary design with floor-to-ceiling windows, granite countertops, and that promised office space overlooking a wooded backyard. The host, David Miller, had accumulated over 80 five-star reviews spanning 3 years. Guest comments consistently praised his responsiveness, cleanliness, and attention to detail. When I sent my booking request on a Tuesday afternoon, David responded within 15 minutes with an enthusiastic welcome message, detailed directions to the property, and recommendations for local restaurants. Everything seemed perfectly legitimate. I arrived on a drizzly Sunday evening in October, driving my rental car, a 2019 white Camry I'd picked up at Sacramento Airport. The house sat at the end of Pine Road, exactly matching the listing photos. Contemporary architecture, well-maintained landscaping, and that sense of complete privacy I'd been seeking. David had left the key in a combination lockbox mounted beside the front door, along with a handwritten welcome note and a small gift basket containing local wine and artisanal crackers. The interior exceeded my expectations. Hardwood floors throughout, modern furniture, a fully equipped kitchen, and upstairs, that perfect office space with a large desk positioned to overlook the backyard through those impressive floor-to-ceiling windows. I spent Sunday evening settling in, organizing my work materials, and planning my week of client calls and project deadlines. Monday and Tuesday proceeded flawlessly. I established a comfortable routine: wake at sunrise for coffee and email review, conduct video conferences from the office, take afternoon walks around the quiet neighborhood, prepare simple dinners in the well-stocked kitchen. The house felt like my own temporary sanctuary, exactly what I needed for productive work. Wednesday morning shattered that sense of security completely. I was preparing breakfast around 7 a.m. when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Fresh muddy footprints crossed the back deck, large boot prints that definitely weren't mine. I wear size 9 sneakers. These prints were clearly size 11 or 12 work boots. The mud was still damp despite the rain having stopped before midnight. I immediately checked every entry point. The front door remained locked with the deadbolt engaged exactly as I'd left it. The back sliding door was locked from the inside. Every window was secure with their locks untouched. The lockbox outside showed no signs of tampering, and I was certain I'd been the only person with the combination David had provided. I spent 20 minutes searching the entire property, checking closets, behind furniture, even the basement storage area. Nothing seemed disturbed inside the house. I convinced myself there must be a logical explanation. Perhaps David had mentioned scheduled maintenance that I'd forgotten, or maybe a neighbor had legitimate access for some reason. Thursday morning brought a discovery that made my hands shake. I found a coffee mug in the kitchen sink that I absolutely had not used. I'm obsessively particular about cleaning dishes immediately after use, a habit developed from years of living in small apartments. This mug was clean but still slightly warm to the touch, as if someone had just finished drinking from it and rinsed it out. The warmth suggested it had been used within the past hour, while I'd been upstairs working. I conducted a thorough search of the house again, this time more systematically. I checked every closet, behind every door, under beds, in the basement, even the attic access panel. I looked for signs that someone might be hiding somewhere, but found nothing out of place. Yet that warm mug was undeniable evidence that someone else had been in the kitchen recently. That evening, I decided to test whether my growing paranoia had any basis in reality. Before going to bed, I created a series of subtle markers throughout the house, small tests that would reveal if anyone entered while I slept. I positioned a pen at a precise angle on the kitchen counter, measuring its exact placement with my phone's ruler app. I stacked 3 books on the coffee table in a specific order, taking photos to document their positions. In the bathroom, I folded a hand towel in a particular way and placed it at a measured distance from the sink edge. Friday morning revealed the terrifying truth. Every single marker had been moved. The pen was now 3 inches to the left of its original position. The books were resacked, but in the wrong order. The red book that had been on top was now in the middle. The bathroom towel was refolded differently and positioned 2 inches closer to the sink. Someone had definitely been in the house while I slept, moving through the rooms, handling my belongings. My hands were trembling as I called David's number. The call went straight to voicemail without ringing. I left a detailed message explaining the situation and asking urgently whether anyone else had legitimate access to the property. I also sent a lengthy text message and an email through the Airbnb platform. Hours passed with no response. I spent Friday in a state of high anxiety, double-checking locks constantly, and jumping at every small sound. That evening, I implemented more sophisticated surveillance measures. I downloaded a motion detection app on my phone and positioned it to record the main living area overnight. I also wedged a small piece of paper tightly into the front door frame before bed. If anyone opened the door, even slightly, the paper would fall to the floor. Saturday morning brought results that defied logical explanation. The paper was lying on the floor near the front door. Someone had definitely entered the house during the night. But when I checked the motion detection app, it showed only one event: me walking to the kitchen for water at 2:17 a.m. Somehow, someone was getting in and out of the house without triggering motion sensors positioned to cover the main floor. That's when I decided to research the property more thoroughly online. What I discovered made my blood run cold. While searching for more information about the house's location and neighborhood, I found a recent real estate listing showing the same property. According to public records I accessed through the county assessor's website, the house had been sold 6 months earlier. The current legal owner was listed as Jennifer Williams, who according to her social media profiles lived in Phoenix, Arizona, 3 states away. David Miller was not the owner of this property. He was running a fraudulent Airbnb listing. I immediately called the Millfield Police Department. The dispatcher took my report seriously, especially when I mentioned the property fraud angle. Officer Martinez arrived within an hour, driving a 2020 black Tahoe. He was professional and thorough, initially somewhat skeptical until I showed him the evidence I'd documented: the fraudulent Airbnb listing, the real property ownership records, the photos of moved objects, and the motion detection footage. "This is more serious than typical Airbnb issues," Officer Martinez said after reviewing everything. "We need to search this place properly and call for backup." What they discovered during their search revealed the true horror of my situation. Behind what appeared to be a utility panel in the basement, officers found a concealed entrance leading to a small hidden room I'd never seen. Inside this space, they discovered camping equipment, food supplies, a laptop computer, and dozens of printed photographs. The photos made my stomach turn. They showed me sleeping, working at the desk, eating meals, even showering. All taken through those floor-to-ceiling windows over the past week, using what appeared to be a telephoto lens. But these weren't the only photos. The collection included images of numerous other people in the same house, previous guests, who I now realized were also victims of this elaborate scheme. The laptop belonged to the fake David Miller. His real identity was Robert Garcia, a 34-year-old man with prior arrests for breaking and entering, voyeurism, and identity theft. Police discovered he'd been operating multiple fraudulent Airbnb listings using stolen property photos and forged documentation. Officer Martinez explained Garcia's sophisticated method. He'd somehow obtained master keys or lockout codes for several properties in the area, houses whose owners traveled frequently or had relocated. He'd study their schedules through social media and other sources, then create fake Airbnb listings when the owners were away for extended periods. While guests stayed in the main house, Garcia lived in hidden spaces he'd constructed, watching and photographing them. The concealed room had a separate entrance through the garage that I'd never noticed, camouflaged behind what looked like an electrical panel. This explained how he could enter and exit without using the main doors, bypassing all my security measures. Detective Sarah Johnson, who arrived later that day driving a 2018 Blue Crown Victoria, explained they'd been investigating a pattern of similar reports across 3 counties. Multiple Airbnb guests had contacted police about strange occurrences, feeling watched, finding moved objects, discovering evidence of unauthorized entry. All incidents were now connected to fraudulent listings operated by Garcia using various fake identities. Garcia was arrested that evening when he returned to collect his surveillance equipment. He'd apparently been watching the police investigation from the surrounding woods, unaware that officers had discovered his hiding place and were waiting for his return. The investigation revealed Garcia had victimized over 40 people across 18 months, collecting thousands of photos and videos. Many victims had reported incidents to Airbnb's customer service but were told their concerns were likely explained by their imagination, local wildlife, or coincidental circumstances. I testified at Garcia's trial 8 months later. He ultimately pled guilty to multiple felony charges including voyeurism, fraud, breaking and entering, and identity theft. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in state prison, noting the sophisticated nature of his crimes and the psychological trauma inflicted on victims. The real Jennifer Williams had no knowledge her former property was being used fraudulently. The actual current owners, who lived out of state and rarely visited, immediately hired a security company and changed all locks after learning about the case. I still use Airbnb for business travel, but now I verify every listing independently. I check property ownership records, reverse search photos to ensure they haven't been stolen from other listings, and always conduct thorough inspections for hidden cameras or unusual access points. I learned that criminals exploit our trust in technology platforms, assuming we won't verify what appears legitimate. The experience taught me that the most terrifying threats aren't supernatural, they're ordinary people who've learned to systematically exploit the systems we rely on for safety and security. What haunts me most isn't the fear of being watched, but the realization of how vulnerable we make ourselves when we sleep in strangers' spaces, trusting that verified and reviewed means genuinely safe. Have you ever had that unsettling feeling of being watched during a stay somewhere, even when you thought you were completely alone? I've been a real estate agent in Ridgeway, Texas for 12 years, handling everything from luxury estates to foreclosure sales. I thought I'd encountered every possible property complication, foundation issues, title disputes, houses with tragic histories that spooked buyers. What happened to my client Sarah Johnson last November challenged everything I believed about property records, public documentation, and the reliability of official systems we depend on daily. Sarah was a 29-year-old graphic designer relocating from Dallas after finalizing a difficult divorce. She needed something affordable but move-in ready, preferably in a quiet neighborhood where she could focus on rebuilding her life and establishing her freelance design business. Her budget was limited, but she had excellent credit and a stable income from several long-term clients. When I found the listing for 1247 Cedar Lane, it seemed absolutely perfect for Sarah's situation and requirements. The property was a charming 1950s ranch-style home featuring original hardwood floors throughout, recently updated kitchen appliances, fresh paint in neutral colors, and a spacious backyard that would be ideal for the vegetable garden Sarah had always dreamed of planting. The listing price immediately caught my attention. It was remarkably low for the neighborhood, almost 30% below comparable properties that had sold within the past 6 months. When I contacted the seller's agent, Jennifer Williams from Brookside Realty, she explained that the owners were highly motivated for a quick sale due to an unexpected job relocation to Seattle. They were willing to price aggressively to avoid carrying 2 mortgages. Sarah fell in love with the property immediately during our first showing on a crisp Tuesday morning in late October. We spent over an hour walking through every room while she enthusiastically planned furniture placement, discussed the potential for converting the small den into a dedicated home office, and even talked about which walls she might want to repaint in warmer colors. The house had excellent natural light, solid construction typical of that era, and a welcoming atmosphere that felt exactly right for her fresh start. The professional inspection went smoothly, revealing only minor issues typical for a home built in the 1950s. Some minor plumbing updates needed, a few electrical outlets that should be upgraded to GFCI, and routine maintenance items like gutter cleaning and exterior touch-up painting. Nothing that would prevent the sale or require major investment from Sarah. Sarah's mortgage application was approved within a week through her credit union, and we scheduled closing for the first Friday in November. Everything proceeded without any complications whatsoever. The title search came back completely clear. Homeowner's insurance was arranged through her existing agent, and utility transfers were scheduled for the day after closing. Sarah moved in the following Saturday, November 9th, making the drive from Dallas in a rented 2020 red U-Haul truck packed with her furniture and belongings. I met her at the house for the final walkthrough and key handover, staying for several hours to help move some of the heavier furniture pieces and ensure everything was working properly. The house felt exactly as it had during all our previous visits: solid, comfortable, and ready for its new owner. The first week and a half passed completely normally. Sarah unpacked systematically, room by room, taking time to arrange everything thoughtfully rather than rushing the process. She established a pleasant daily routine of morning coffee on the back porch while checking emails, afternoon work sessions in her converted office space, and evening walks around the neighborhood to introduce herself to neighbors and explore local shops. Tuesday, November 19th, everything changed in the most disturbing way imaginable. Sarah called me around 10 a.m., her voice shaking with confusion and barely controlled panic. "Michelle, I need you to come over to the house immediately. Something is very, very wrong here, and I don't understand what's happening." I found her standing in the driveway beside her 2018 blue Honda Civic, holding what appeared to be a newspaper clipping and looking genuinely pale with shock. Her hands were trembling as she held out the paper. "I was researching the neighborhood's history online for a community newsletter article I'm writing," she explained, her voice still unsteady. "I wanted to include some background about local landmarks and historical properties. I went to the library yesterday to check their newspaper archives, and I found this article about our street." The newspaper clipping was from the Ridgeway Chronicle, dated September 15th, just 2 months before Sarah's purchase. The headline read in bold letters, "Historic Cedar Lane Home Demolished After Severe Storm Damage." Below the headline was a clear photograph showing a house being torn down by demolition crews, with heavy machinery and debris trucks. The address was clearly visible on the mailbox in the photo, 1247 Cedar Lane. My hands went cold as I read the article details. The piece explained that the house at 1247 Cedar Lane had been severely damaged during an intense summer storm in early August, with structural issues including foundation cracks and roof damage making it completely unsafe for human habitation. The city building inspector had ordered immediate demolition after multiple engineering reports deemed the building beyond any possibility of repair. The article quoted the demolition contractor stating that the house was completely removed and all debris hauled away on September 12th. "But that's absolutely impossible," I said, looking back and forth between the newspaper article and the perfectly intact, well-maintained house standing directly behind us. "We toured this exact house multiple times in October. You've been living here for 10 days. I have photos from our showings. We stood there in the driveway, staring at a house that, according to documented public record and newspaper coverage, had been completely demolished 2 months earlier. I immediately called my office to double-check our listing files and transaction records. Everything was exactly where it should be: detailed photos from multiple angles, complete property descriptions, seller contact information, even the lockbox access code I'd used during showings. I called the title company to verify all closing documents were properly recorded. They confirmed everything had been filed correctly, with clear title legally transferred to Sarah on November 8th. But the newspaper article was clearly dated September 15th, nearly 2 months before our first property showing in late October. Sarah and I spent the entire afternoon conducting increasingly frantic research. We drove to the Ridgeway Chronicle newspaper offices, where the archives clerk confirmed the article's complete authenticity, and showed us the original layout files from that edition. We visited the city planning department, where permit records clearly showed demolition work approved and completed on September 12th. We even tracked down Garcia Construction Company, whose detailed records showed they had torn down the house at 1247 Cedar Lane and hauled away all debris to an approved disposal site on September 13th. Yet the house stood perfectly intact, exactly as it had appeared in our listing photos. Detective Robert Williams from Ridgeway Police Department arrived that evening, driving a 2019 green Ford Explorer, after we filed a detailed report about the impossible situation. He was professional and thorough, but clearly puzzled as he examined our extensive documentation, the newspaper clipping, city demolition permits, construction company records, and Sarah's completely valid purchase documents. "I've been investigating property crimes for 8 years," he admitted after reviewing everything carefully. "I've never encountered anything remotely like this situation. You have legitimate, verifiable proof that this house was demolished, but you also have equally legitimate proof that you legally purchased it. Both sets of documents appear completely authentic." The investigation that followed over the next 2 weeks revealed something far more disturbing and sophisticated than a simple clerical error or records mix-up. Detective Williams, working with county property specialists and state fraud investigators, discovered that 2 entirely different properties had somehow been using the identical address of 1247 Cedar Lane. The original house, the one demolished in September after storm damage, had indeed been a legitimate structure built in 1952 and occupied by the same family for over 30 years. But the house Sarah had purchased was not the original 1247 Cedar Lane at all. Through painstaking examination of property tax records, building permits, and utility connection data spanning several decades, investigators determined that someone had constructed a completely new house on the lot immediately after the legitimate demolition, then systematically falsified official records to make it appear as though the original house had never been destroyed. The new construction had been completed with remarkable speed, using the exact foundation footprint and architectural plans of the demolished house. The builders had access to original blueprints, allowing them to recreate the house's appearance so precisely that it was virtually indistinguishable from the original structure, even down to matching paint colors and landscaping details. The fraud operation was incredibly sophisticated and involved multiple accomplices working within various official systems. The fake seller that Sarah had unknowingly purchased from was actually part of an elaborate criminal scheme designed to sell illegally constructed properties using the identities and records of legitimately demolished homes throughout the region. Thomas Garcia, owner of Garcia Construction Company, the same company that had legitimately demolished the original house, was arrested along with 5 accomplices, including a city permits clerk, a title company employee, a county records administrator, and 2 unlicensed contractors. They had been operating this scheme for over 3 years, targeting demolished properties across 4 counties. The investigation revealed their systematic method. Garcia's crew would monitor official demolition orders through their legitimate business connections, then immediately begin unauthorized construction on the cleared lots using salvaged materials, unlicensed workers, and no proper permits or safety inspections. They would simultaneously create false paper trails showing that the original houses had never actually been demolished, allowing them to sell the new structures to unsuspecting buyers as legitimate existing properties. The houses they built, while appearing normal to casual inspection, were constructed without proper electrical systems, plumbing codes, or structural engineering required by building regulations. Sarah's house, along with 11 others identified during the investigation, were potentially dangerous for long-term habitation due to code violations and substandard construction methods. Sarah's purchase was ultimately voided by court order after a 2-month legal process. The house she had been living in was condemned by city inspectors and scheduled for proper demolition under official supervision. She received full financial restitution through the state's Real Estate Fraud Recovery Fund, plus additional compensation for moving expenses, temporary housing costs, and emotional distress. Thomas Garcia was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for real estate fraud, construction code violations, conspiracy, and money laundering. His accomplices received sentences ranging from 4 to 10 years depending on their level of involvement. The case resulted in new verification procedures for property records and demolition documentation throughout Texas, requiring cross-referencing between multiple government databases. Sarah eventually purchased a legitimate house in the same neighborhood, though she spent 4 months in temporary housing while legal proceedings concluded and her restitution was processed. She later told me that the experience fundamentally changed how she viewed official documentation and government records, teaching her that even the most basic assumptions about property ownership and public records could be systematically manipulated by sufficiently organized criminals. As her real estate agent, I completely overhauled my property verification procedures, now requiring cross-referencing of demolition records, building permits, newspaper archives, and utility connection histories for every listing. The case changed standard practices throughout our office and influenced new industry guidelines for property verification, especially for unusually priced or quickly available listings. What disturbs me most about this experience is how completely normal and legitimate everything appeared throughout the entire process. The house looked perfect, all paperwork seemed authentic, and even experienced professionals like myself, title company employees, and mortgage underwriters were completely deceived by the sophisticated fraud operation. The real horror wasn't supernatural or mysterious, it was discovering that something as fundamental as whether a house actually exists can be falsified so convincingly that every professional involved in a standard real estate transaction can be systematically deceived without anyone suspecting the truth. Have you ever discovered that something you completely trusted and relied upon turned out to be entirely different from what you believed it to be? I've been a property manager in Clearwater, North Carolina for 9 years, handling everything from downtown apartments to remote vacation rentals scattered throughout the Blue Ridge Mountains. What happened to my client Angela Davis at an isolated forest cabin in Oakwood last December taught me that the most dangerous rental situations arise when criminals exploit properties without any owner knowledge or consent. Angela was a 31-year-old freelance nature photographer from Raleigh seeking a month-long creative retreat to work on her upcoming photography book about Appalachian wilderness. She had been searching vacation rental websites for weeks, looking for something completely isolated where she could focus on her artistic work without distractions from modern life. She found what appeared to be the perfect rental property through a popular vacation booking platform, a rustic log cabin deep within the Oakwood National Forest boundaries, advertised as completely secluded wilderness experience, with no cell phone service for true digital detox, and authentic mountain living. The listing emphasized the property's remoteness as its primary selling feature. The professionally photographed listing showed a charming single-story log cabin with chinked walls, a fieldstone fireplace, basic kitchen facilities, and a wraparound porch overlooking dense forest that stretched for miles in every direction. The photos captured exactly the isolated, peaceful setting Angela needed for her intensive creative project. She could envision herself spending weeks photographing the surrounding wilderness while living simply in this perfect mountain retreat. The rental rate was surprisingly affordable for such a unique and isolated property, listed at just $800 for the entire month of December, which was significantly below typical vacation rental prices for the region. Angela assumed the low price reflected the property's remoteness and lack of modern amenities like internet or reliable cell coverage. The host identified himself as Michael Brown and responded to Angela's initial inquiry within just a few hours, providing enthusiastic responses and detailed logistical information. He explained that the cabin was family-owned property, passed down through several generations, and was only occasionally rented to carefully selected guests who would appreciate its historical significance and natural setting. Michael emphasized the property's extreme remoteness in his communications, repeatedly warning Angela that all supplies needed to be brought in advance since the nearest grocery store was over 40 miles away down winding mountain roads. He provided detailed directions involving multiple turns onto progressively smaller forest roads, culminating in a barely marked dirt track that led to the cabin. Angela drove to the property on December 3rd in her well-equipped 2018 gold Subaru Outback, loaded with photography gear, food supplies, camping equipment, and everything she anticipated needing for a month of wilderness living. She followed Michael's intricate turn-by-turn directions, navigating down increasingly narrow forest roads until she finally reached a barely visible dirt track marked only by a small, weathered wooden sign reading, Pine Ridge Cabin private property. The cabin sat in a small natural clearing completely surrounded by towering pine trees, creating the perfect isolated setting she had envisioned. The structure matched the listing photos exactly: authentic log construction, stone chimney, covered porch, and windows that looked out onto unbroken forest in every direction. Following Michael's detailed instructions, Angela found the key hidden under a specific loose floorboard on the front porch, along with a handwritten welcome note and a basic inventory list of supplies already available in the cabin. She spent her first day systematically settling in, organizing her extensive photography equipment, familiarizing herself with the propane appliances and wood-burning stove, and planning her shooting schedule for the surrounding forest areas. The cabin was perfectly equipped for her creative needs. Propane-powered refrigerator and stove, efficient wood-burning heating system, oil lamps and candles for evening lighting, a comfortable bed with warm quilts, and most importantly, complete silence except for natural forest sounds wind through pine branches, bird calls, and occasional wildlife movement. Angela quickly established a productive daily routine over her first week at the cabin. She would wake before sunrise for golden hour photography sessions, spend midday hours maintaining and organizing equipment, dedicate afternoons to exploring new shooting locations within hiking distance, work on photo editing by lamplight in the evenings, and retire early to maximize daylight shooting hours. The isolation was exactly what her creative process needed. Without phone service, internet, or any modern distractions, Angela found herself completely absorbed in her artistic work, producing some of the best nature photography of her career during those first 8 days. December 11th shattered her peaceful creative retreat in the most terrifying way imaginable. Angela was sitting at the small kitchen table around 9 p.m., editing photos on her laptop using battery power, when she heard the unmistakable sound of a vehicle approaching on the dirt access road. Headlights swept across the cabin windows as what sounded like a pickup truck pulled into the clearing and parked near her Subaru. She watched through the front window as someone got out of the vehicle, clearly familiar with the property layout, and walked directly toward the front door with confident, purposeful steps. The person outside appeared to have keys and was attempting to unlock the front door. "Hello?" A woman's voice called out sharply as the door swung open. "Who the hell is in my house?" Angela's heart stopped completely. A woman in her early 50s stood in the doorway, holding a powerful flashlight and looking genuinely shocked and angry to discover someone inside what she clearly considered her own property. She was carrying overnight bags and personal items, obviously expecting to find an empty cabin. "I'm very sorry, but there must be some kind of mistake here," Angela said, trying to keep her voice calm despite her racing pulse. "I rented this cabin for the entire month of December. I have all the confirmation paperwork and payment receipts." The woman, who immediately identified herself as Linda Thompson, looked completely baffled and increasingly concerned. "I own this cabin. I've owned this property for 15 years. I come up here every December for my annual winter retreat. Absolutely no one has permission to be here." They spent the next tense hour comparing their respective documentation in the cabin's lamplight. Angela produced her detailed rental confirmation emails, payment receipts, and the comprehensive instructions she had received from Michael Brown. Linda countered with property deeds, county tax records, utility bills, and insurance documents clearly establishing her legal ownership of the cabin, which she had always called Pine Ridge Retreat. Linda had never heard of anyone named Michael Brown and had never authorized any rental listing for her private property. She explained that she had been spending every December at the cabin for over a decade, a cherished tradition since her retirement from teaching high school in Charlotte. She had driven up that evening in her 2017 Burgundy Ford F-150, fully expecting to find her cabin exactly as she had left it after her November maintenance visit. "Someone has been illegally using my property without any permission whatsoever," Linda said, examining Angela's rental documentation with growing alarm. "These papers look completely legitimate, but I never agreed to any rental arrangement. Someone is running a scam using my cabin." Both women quickly realized the situation was potentially very dangerous for both of them. They were alone together in an extremely isolated forest location with no cell phone service, and someone had been operating an elaborate illegal rental scheme using Linda's private property without her knowledge. They had no way to immediately contact authorities or verify their person's claims. After lengthy discussion, they decided the safest course was to drive together in Linda's truck to the nearest town with reliable cell coverage to contact police and sort out the situation with official help. They gathered essential items and secured the cabin before making the 40-minute drive to Oakwood. Sheriff's Deputy James Wilson arrived at the cabin early the next morning, driving a 2020 charcoal Chevrolet Tahoe equipped for rural patrol work. He examined both women's extensive documentation and quickly confirmed that Linda was indeed the legitimate property owner while Angela was clearly an innocent victim of a sophisticated rental fraud operation. Deputy Wilson contacted Detective Sarah Martinez, who specialized in property crimes and fraud investigations. She arrived later that morning and immediately recognized the case as part of a larger pattern she had been tracking across multiple counties in western North Carolina. The investigation revealed an incredibly sophisticated property theft scheme specifically targeting remote, privately owned cabins and vacation properties throughout the Blue Ridge Mountain region. Someone with extensive knowledge of property databases and owner behavior patterns had been systematically monitoring properties with predictable absentee ownership, creating convincing fake rental listings during periods when legitimate owners were away, and collecting substantial money from completely unsuspecting renters. Detective Martinez explained that the fraudulent listings used professionally stolen photographs from real estate websites, detailed property information gathered from county tax records and property databases, and sophisticated social media monitoring to determine when property owners would be absent for extended periods. The fake, Michael Brown, identity was just one of several fabricated personas used across multiple illegal rental operations throughout the region. The investigation expanded rapidly as detectives discovered that at least 17 similar cases had been reported across 6 counties over the previous 18 months. The scheme systematically targeted cabins, hunting lodges, mountain retreats, and vacation properties where owners maintain predictable seasonal schedules, making it possible to rent them out illegally during vacant periods without detection. Financial investigators traced the fraudulent rental payments through a complex network of fake business accounts, prepaid debit cards, and money transfer services designed to obscure the money trail. The operation had been generating substantial illegal income while leaving both property owners and renters as victims. The investigation ultimately identified the perpetrator as Robert Garcia, a 38-year-old former employee of a regional property management company who had maintained access to multiple property databases, owner contact information, and seasonal usage patterns even after his employment ended. His inside knowledge of the vacation rental industry allowed him to create extremely convincing fake listings that fooled both renters and online booking platforms. Garcia was arrested at his apartment in Asheville 3 weeks later, where police discovered detailed files on dozens of target properties, sophisticated fake identification documents, professional photography equipment for creating listing photos, and evidence of at least 37 illegal rental transactions generating over $62,000 in fraudulent income. Angela received a complete refund through the vacation rental platform's fraud protection program, plus additional compensation for travel expenses, alternative accommodation costs, and the disruption to her planned creative retreat. The platform also implemented enhanced property verification procedures as a direct result of this case. Linda immediately installed a comprehensive security system including motion-activated cameras, remote monitoring capabilities, and cellular-based alerts to prevent any future unauthorized use of her cherished retreat property. She also began coordinating with neighboring property owners to establish an informal network for monitoring suspicious activity in the area. Robert Garcia was ultimately sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, computer crimes, and criminal trespassing. The case resulted in new legislation requiring enhanced verification procedures for vacation rental platforms and established new alert systems allowing property owners to monitor for unauthorized listings of their properties. Linda and Angela developed an unexpected friendship through their shared ordeal, with Angela eventually returning the following year as Linda's legitimate invited guest to complete her photography project. Linda later told me that the experience fundamentally changed her understanding of how vulnerable remote properties are to systematic exploitation by criminals who understand how to research ownership patterns and predict owner absence schedules. As a property manager, I completely overhauled my security procedures, now regularly searching all major rental platforms for unauthorized listings of properties under my management. The case taught me that sophisticated criminals can exploit virtually any property where owners maintain predictable patterns of absence, creating completely convincing rental operations that successfully deceive both renters and established booking platforms. The most disturbing aspect of this case wasn't the financial fraud or property violation, but the realization of how easily determined criminals can systematically monitor private property owners, study their behavioral patterns, and exploit their homes during predictable vulnerable periods. It demonstrated that even the most isolated, private retreats aren't safe from organized criminal exploitation by people with knowledge of property systems and owner behavior patterns. What haunts me most is how completely normal and legitimate everything appeared from Angela's perspective throughout the entire rental process, while Linda remained completely unaware that her private sanctuary was being systematically violated and exploited for months. Have you ever arrived somewhere you had every legal right to be, only to discover someone else who also had completely legitimate reasons for believing they belonged there? I've been a freelance investigative journalist for 8 years, specializing in exposing small-town corruption and government transparency violations across rural America. What I discovered in Fairview, Pennsylvania last September revealed the most comprehensive illegal surveillance operation I've ever encountered, and it was being orchestrated by the very officials I trusted during my investigation. I had rented a large Victorian house on Maple Avenue for what I expected to be a month-long investigation into the town's suspiciously targeted property tax reassessments. Several long-time residents had contacted me through my website about dramatic tax increases that seemed specifically designed to force certain families out of homes they'd owned for decades, while other similar properties remained untouched. The rental house belonged to William Davis. According to the lease agreement I'd signed through Fairview Property Management, a local company that had been operating in the area for over 15 years. The 1898 Victorian featured original hardwood floors throughout, 12-foot ceilings, period architectural details, and a spacious layout that would be perfect for spreading out documents, conducting video interviews, and organizing the extensive research materials I anticipated collecting. The house came fully furnished with period-appropriate pieces, high-speed internet access, and a converted basement that the rental listing had described as additional storage and workspace. Exactly what I needed for organizing what I expected to be hundreds of municipal documents, property records, and interview transcripts. I arrived on September 2nd in my 2021 Navy Honda Accord, loaded with recording equipment, portable scanners, legal pads, and everything I anticipated needing for a thorough investigation of what appeared to be systematic municipal corruption targeting specific residents. The house was exactly as advertised, well-maintained, comfortable, and situated on a quiet residential street that would allow me to work without distractions while remaining close enough to City Hall and other municipal buildings for easy access to public records and interview subjects. My first week proceeded exactly according to plan. I spent mornings reviewing public documents at City Hall, afternoons conducting interviews with affected residents, and evenings in the house organizing information and identifying patterns in the property reassessment data that suggested deliberate targeting rather than random municipal incompetence. I interviewed Police Chief John Martinez, who seemed genuinely concerned about residents' complaints and cooperative with my investigation. City Clerk Ruth Thompson provided extensive access to property records and tax assessment files. Deputy Mayor David Lewis granted me a lengthy interview about municipal operations and budget processes. Building Inspector Michael Johnson walked me through the property assessment procedures step by step. Everyone appeared helpful, professional, and committed to transparency, exactly what I hoped to find in a small town dealing with what seemed like isolated corruption issues. September 10th changed everything about my understanding of Fairview's government, and my role in what I discovered was an elaborate setup designed specifically for me. I was organizing documents in the basement workspace when I noticed something unusual about the far wall's construction. What appeared to be a built-in bookshelf containing old storage boxes seemed slightly misaligned, with a noticeable gap behind one section that suggested the structure might not be permanently attached to the foundation wall as it initially appeared. Investigating more closely, I discovered that the entire bookshelf unit was actually a carefully constructed hinged panel designed to conceal what lay behind it. When I managed to swing it open, I found a hidden room that had definitely not been mentioned in the rental listing or visible during my initial walkthrough of the property. The concealed room was significantly larger than I would have expected, clearly requiring substantial excavation work beneath the original house foundation. It contained dozens of industrial-grade filing cabinets arranged along 3 walls in a systematic organizational pattern that immediately suggested professional record-keeping rather than casual storage. I opened the first filing cabinet and discovered detailed files on Fairview residents, not just basic property ownership records or tax information, but comprehensive personal dossiers containing employment histories, medical records, family relationship details, financial data including bank account information, legal troubles, personal habits, behavioral observations, and surveillance notes spanning multiple years. Each individual file contained extensive photographic documentation taken without the subject's knowledge or consent. These included images of people entering and leaving their homes at various times, shopping at local businesses, working in their yards, socializing with neighbors, attending public meetings, and conducting private activities. Many photos were clearly taken from considerable distances using professional telephoto lenses, while others appeared to be surveillance footage captured from strategically positioned cameras throughout the town. The files were meticulously organized alphabetically by family name and chronologically by date, with regular updates indicating this surveillance operation was not historical but actively ongoing. I found recent entries dated just 3 days before my arrival, meaning someone had been updating these records while I was already in town conducting my investigation. But the most shocking discovery was the identity of who had been collecting and organizing this massive surveillance database. The files contained detailed activity logs, surveillance schedules, and update records signed with initials that I immediately recognized from my week of interviews. JM clearly matched Police Chief John Martinez, who had seemed so cooperative and concerned about residents' complaints. RT corresponded to City Clerk Ruth Thompson, who had provided me extensive access to what I thought were all relevant public records. DL matched Deputy Mayor David Lewis, who had granted me that detailed interview about municipal transparency. MJ was obviously Building Inspector Michael Johnson, who had walked me through assessment procedures. These weren't surveillance files collected by some external threat or criminal organization. This was systematic, comprehensive monitoring conducted by multiple city officials working in coordination to spy on their own residents using their official positions and government resources. I spent the next 4 hours systematically photographing documents, discovering evidence of a surveillance network that involved at least 12 city employees across virtually every municipal department: police, administration, tax assessment, building permits, public works, library services, and even the volunteer fire department. The files revealed exactly how this operation functioned on a day-to-day basis. City employees used their official positions and access to government databases to gather personal information, coordinate surveillance activities, and systematically target residents who were deemed problematic by the network's leadership. Problematic residents were typically those who questioned city policies at public meetings, filed complaints about municipal services, appealed property tax assessments, requested public records, or otherwise exercised their legal rights in ways that challenged city officials' preferred operations. The property tax reassessment scheme that had originally brought me to Fairview was just one tool in a comprehensive system of harassment and control. Families who complained about city services would mysteriously face dramatically increased tax assessments, permit applications would be denied or delayed indefinitely, police would conduct frequent welfare checks and traffic stops, and city inspectors would find previously unnoticed code violations requiring expensive corrections. The files contained specific strategic plans for pressuring targeted residents to relocate or comply with unofficial demands. Some documents described coordinated campaigns designed to make certain families' lives so difficult that they would voluntarily sell their homes and leave town, allowing connected individuals to purchase properties at below market prices. I discovered my own file, which had been started the morning after I first contacted City Hall to announce my investigation. It contained detailed background information about my career, previous investigations, personal habits, financial situation, and comprehensive photographs documenting my daily activities since arriving in Fairview. They had been systematically monitoring me from the moment I entered their town. The surveillance network had been operating for at least 7 years according to the oldest files I could locate. They maintained active surveillance records on over 480 residents in a town with a total population of only 1,200 people, meaning they were systematically monitoring approximately 40% of the entire community. The files revealed that the rental arrangement itself had been a setup designed specifically to monitor my investigation, while controlling my access to information and potential sources. William Davis was a completely fabricated identity created by the surveillance network to lure me into a house they controlled, allowing them to monitor my activities, communications, and investigative methods while I unknowingly gathered evidence of their operations. I immediately contacted the Pennsylvania State Police, explaining that I had discovered evidence of systematic civil rights violations by an entire municipal government. Detective Angela Miller arrived that evening in an unmarked 2019 white Ford Fusion, clearly shocked by the scope and sophistication of what I had uncovered in the basement. "This is the most comprehensive municipal surveillance operation I've encountered in 23 years of law enforcement," she said after spending 2 hours reviewing the filing system. "We need federal involvement immediately. This goes far beyond state jurisdiction." The FBI took control of the investigation within 48 hours of my initial report. Special Agent Thomas Brown arrived with a team of specialists who spent the next 2 weeks systematically cataloging evidence from the hidden room while simultaneously conducting arrests throughout Fairview's city government structure. The federal investigation revealed that the surveillance network had been initiated by former Mayor Patricia Garcia, who had recruited city employees gradually over several years by exploiting their access to personal information and official authority. The operation was funded through carefully manipulated municipal budget allocations and justified internally as enhanced community security measures necessary to maintain order and stability. 11 city officials were ultimately arrested and charged with federal crimes, including Police Chief Martinez, Deputy Mayor Lewis, City Clerk Thompson, Tax Assessor Robert Williams, Building Inspector Johnson, Public Works Director Jennifer Davis, and 5 other municipal employees. They faced charges including conspiracy to violate civil rights, illegal surveillance, extortion, abuse of official power, wire fraud, and racketeering. The rental property management company was determined to be legitimate but had been deceived by sophisticated false documentation. The actual house owner lived in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and had no knowledge that his inherited property was being used as a base for surveillance operations targeting a journalist. The case resulted in complete dissolution of Fairview's existing city government, with Pennsylvania state authorities imposing direct oversight for a minimum of 3 years. Federal monitors were installed to ensure compliance with constitutional protections and proper municipal procedures while new elections were organized under state supervision. My investigation became the foundation for a book documenting how small-town officials can systematically create oppressive surveillance states, using their legitimate authority and access to personal information. The case influenced new Pennsylvania legislation requiring oversight of all municipal surveillance activities and establishing stronger protections for residents' privacy rights. Most residents I interviewed after the arrest expressed shock at learning they had been under systematic surveillance for years by neighbors and officials they had trusted with local government responsibilities. Many described feeling fundamentally violated and questioning whether they could ever again trust any authority figures in their community. The surveillance network's sophistication and scope demonstrated how easily trusted public officials can exploit their positions to control and manipulate the very communities they are elected and hired to serve. This wasn't foreign interference, outside agitators, or traditional criminal activity. It was neighbors systematically monitoring and controlling neighbors using official government resources and legal authority. What disturbed me most about the entire experience was how completely normal and legitimate everything had appeared on the surface. Fairview seemed like a typical small American town with friendly officials, standard municipal operations, and the kind of local government transparency that citizens should expect, while underneath was a comprehensive surveillance system designed to monitor and control any resident who questioned official authority or exercised their constitutional rights. The hidden room represented years of systematic violations of privacy, civil liberties, and democratic principles by people who had sworn oaths to protect and serve their community's interests rather than their own power and control. Have you ever wondered what kind of detailed information your local government officials might be secretly collecting and maintaining about you beyond what you've voluntarily provided through official channels? I've been an apartment maintenance supervisor in Springfield, Illinois for 11 years, handling everything from routine repairs to emergency situations across 3 different residential complexes throughout the city. What I discovered in Unit 4B at Brookside Manor Apartments last January was the most disturbing case of systematic animal exploitation I've ever encountered, and it revealed something much darker about human nature than simple hoarding or mental illness. Michelle Garcia had been living in the spacious 2-bedroom apartment for 3 years without generating a single complaint from neighbors, management, or city inspectors. She consistently paid her $850 monthly rent on the first of every month, never submitted maintenance requests for repairs or upgrades, kept her unit quiet during all hours, and appeared to be exactly the kind of responsible, low-maintenance tenant that property managers actively seek and value in their residential buildings. The only remotely unusual aspect of Michelle's tenancy that anyone had ever noticed was the occasionally strong air freshener smell that would drift from her unit into the second-floor hallway. But many residents use heavy commercial air fresheners for various reasons, including smoking, cooking with aromatic spices, or simply preferring heavily scented living environments. I had never considered the smell worth investigating, or even particularly noteworthy until other circumstances forced my immediate attention to Unit 4B. I only discovered the horrific truth behind Michelle's carefully maintained facade when Mrs. Dorothy Anderson, the 73-year-old retired elementary school teacher living in the adjacent Unit 4A, began calling our property management office repeatedly about what she described as an increasingly powerful sewage-like odor that seemed to be emanating directly from Michelle's apartment through their shared wall. Mrs. Anderson had been a model tenant in Brookside Manor for 8 years, never once submitting a complaint about noise, maintenance issues, or neighbor problems. She was known throughout the building as polite, considerate, and extremely tolerant of typical apartment living inconveniences. When she began insisting that something was seriously and urgently wrong next door, demanding immediate investigation to determine if there was a plumbing emergency or major health hazard affecting the entire building, I knew the situation required prompt professional attention. I knocked on Michelle's door repeatedly over 2 consecutive days, clearly announcing myself as building maintenance and explaining that I needed to investigate potential plumbing failures or sewage backups that might be affecting multiple units. I could definitely hear movement inside the apartment, distinct footsteps, shuffling sounds, objects being moved around, and what seemed like multiple sources of activity, but Michelle never came to the door or responded to my increasingly urgent calls and knocks. When she finally answered on January 15th around 3:30 p.m., opening the door only wide enough to peer through a narrow gap, the overwhelming smell that immediately escaped hit me like a physical assault. It was a nauseating combination of concentrated ammonia, organic decay, accumulated animal waste, stagnant air, and something else that was completely indescribable but absolutely revolting. I immediately understood why Mrs. Anderson had been so persistent and concerned about the deteriorating odor situation. Michelle nervously blocked the doorway with her entire body, speaking through the smallest possible opening while repeatedly insisting that everything was perfectly fine and that she didn't need or want any maintenance assistance. She was obviously anxious and actively trying to prevent me from seeing inside her apartment, but I could observe definite movement behind her, what appeared to be multiple animals darting between furniture pieces, climbing on walls, perching on various surfaces, and creating constant motion throughout the visible portions of her living space. "I'm sorry, but I have legal authority to inspect for potential health code violations that affect other tenants," I informed her firmly, using my master key to gain entry despite her continued protests. As the building's licensed maintenance supervisor, I had both the authority and responsibility to investigate reported health and safety concerns that could impact the entire residential complex. What I discovered inside that two-bedroom apartment completely defied rational comprehension and remains the most profoundly disturbing scene I've witnessed in over a decade of professional property management and maintenance work. 23 cats were living in that 900-square-foot apartment. The scene was absolutely apocalyptic. Every piece of furniture had been completely destroyed by scratching, climbing, and waste accumulation. Walls were stained with dried urine streaks from floor level up to shoulder height, creating dark, permanent discoloration throughout every room. Animal feces covered virtually every horizontal surface in thick, caked layers that clearly represented months or possibly years of continuous accumulation without any cleaning or waste removal efforts. The cats themselves were in various stages of obvious illness, severe malnutrition, and acute psychological distress. I could see tiny kittens that appeared to be actively nursing from visibly malnourished mothers, pregnant females with prominently visible ribs indicating starvation, adult cats with severely matted fur and obvious respiratory problems causing labored breathing, and several animals exhibiting clearly abnormal behaviors including repetitive pacing, aggressive territorial disputes, and what appeared to be neurotic self-mutilation. The apartment's air quality was so severely compromised that I had to step outside twice within the first 10 minutes to avoid vomiting from the overwhelming ammonia concentration and putrid organic decay. The atmospheric conditions were clearly toxic for humans and obviously creating severe health problems for the animals forced to exist in those horrific conditions. But the most deeply disturbing discovery wasn't the deplorable living conditions, obvious animal neglect, or even the clear evidence of systematic abuse and torture. While Michelle followed me through the apartment, frantically attempting to explain that she was helping and rescuing the cats and that they were much better off with her than abandoned on the streets, I began noticing detailed paperwork and documentation scattered throughout the rooms. In the master bedroom's walk-in closet, I found comprehensive, meticulously organized records that Michelle had been systematically maintaining on every single cat in her collection. These weren't simple pet care records, basic veterinary notes, or typical animal welfare documentation. Michelle had been keeping detailed behavioral observation logs, systematic breeding schedules, experimental research protocols, and comprehensive documentation of what her handwritten notes, specifically termed social hierarchy manipulation studies, and systematic stress response testing procedures. The records revealed that Michelle had been deliberately conducting sophisticated psychological experiments on these cats over an extended period, treating them as disposable laboratory subjects rather than living animals deserving basic care, protection, and humane treatment. Her extensive handwritten notes described specific interventions systematically designed to create maximum psychological stress so she could observe, measure, and document the animal's behavioral responses to various forms of induced trauma. Multiple entries provided detailed descriptions of how she would deliberately separate nursing mothers from their dependent kittens for extended periods to study what she termed maternal stress response patterns and adaptation failures. Other documented experiments described systematically withholding food from specific cats to create desperate competition and violent aggression among the animals, then recording detailed observations about the resulting behavioral changes, social hierarchy disruptions, and what she called survival adaptation mechanisms. Her research notes demonstrated that she had been systematically introducing new cats into the established environment specifically to disrupt existing social groups and territorial arrangements, then documenting detailed observations about the resulting conflicts, stress behaviors, territorial disputes, and what she termed social adaptation failure responses and psychological breakdown patterns. The most horrifying sections of her extensive documentation described multiple cats that had died during her research experiments over the previous 2 years. She had maintained detailed death records documenting their final behaviors, physical deterioration processes, and death circumstances, treating these animals' prolonged suffering and preventable deaths as valuable scientific data rather than the tragic consequences of systematic torture and abuse. I immediately contacted both Springfield Animal Control and the City Police Department to report what appeared to be systematic animal cruelty and possible criminal activity. Officer David Thompson arrived first in a 2020 black Dodge Charger, followed within 30 minutes by Animal Control Supervisor Lisa Williams driving a specially equipped 2018 beige Ford Transit van containing animal transport cages, emergency medical supplies, and equipment for handling large-scale animal rescue operations. Both law enforcement officers were visibly shocked and disturbed by the conditions inside Michelle's apartment. Officer Thompson, a 15-year police veteran, had to step outside twice due to the overwhelming ammonia concentration and putrid air quality, while Lisa Williams immediately began conducting emergency medical triage on the cats based on their apparent physical conditions and urgent veterinary needs. The apartment was officially condemned as uninhabitable due to extensive biological contamination, structural damage, and serious ongoing health hazards. The animal removal operation took Animal Control over 7 hours and required 4 separate transport trips to safely evacuate all 23 cats from the premises, with many of the animals requiring immediate emergency veterinary intervention for severe malnutrition, acute respiratory infections, and serious psychological trauma resulting from chronic stress and systematic abuse. Michelle Garcia was arrested at the scene and formally charged with 23 individual counts of felony animal cruelty, plus additional charges for conducting unlicensed animal experimentation, maintaining a public health hazard, violating city ordinances regarding animal care and residential occupancy limits, and conspiracy to commit animal abuse. The subsequent criminal investigation revealed that Michelle held a master's degree in experimental psychology from Illinois State University but had been systematically rejected from multiple doctoral programs at various institutions due to what graduate admissions committees had specifically documented as serious ethical concerns and red flags regarding her proposed research methodologies involving animal subjects and experimental protocols. Unable to conduct her desired psychological research through legitimate academic institutions and properly supervised university laboratories, Michelle had been using the cats confined in her apartment to perform the experimental studies she couldn't legally conduct through established scientific channels. Her extensive documentation represented systematic torture disguised as behavioral research, treating living animals as completely disposable research subjects with no consideration for their welfare, suffering, or basic rights. The apartment required complete demolition and reconstruction of all interior surfaces and systems. Floors, walls, ceiling materials, electrical systems, plumbing infrastructure, and HVAC components all had to be completely removed and replaced due to extensive biological contamination and irreparable structural damage. The total restoration cost exceeded $48,000. Not including lost rental income during the 8-month renovation period required to make the unit habitable again. Michelle Garcia was ultimately sentenced to 6 years in state prison and permanently banned from owning, housing, caring for, or having any contact with animals for the remainder of her natural life. The case influenced new Illinois state legislation requiring mandatory welfare inspections for tenants suspected of animal hoarding and established specific legal reporting procedures for property managers who discover evidence of animal abuse or experimental activity. Most of the rescued cats were eventually successfully rehabilitated and placed in permanent adoptive homes through coordinated efforts between animal control, local veterinary clinics, and animal rescue organizations, though several animals required months of intensive medical treatment and specialized behavioral therapy to recover from their systematic trauma. The psychological damage from Michelle's experimental torture had created permanent behavioral problems in many of the surviving animals, including chronic anxiety disorders, abnormal aggression patterns, and severely disrupted social behaviors. This case completely transformed my understanding of animal hoarding situations and the various motivations behind such scenarios. I learned that these disturbing situations aren't always about mental illness, inability to properly care for pets, or misguided compassion taken to dangerous extremes. Sometimes they represent deliberate, systematic exploitation and torture disguised as animal rescue efforts or pseudoscientific research activities. What disturbed me most profoundly about Michelle's case was how completely normal, respectable, and trustworthy she appeared to everyone in her community. She was consistently quiet, clean, professionally dressed, articulate, and polite in all social interactions, exactly the kind of responsible, educated tenant that property managers actively seek and prefer in their residential buildings. Her horrific experimental torture activities were completely hidden behind a carefully constructed and meticulously maintained facade of middle-class respectability and academic credibility. She had been systematically torturing animals for years while successfully presenting herself to neighbors, colleagues, and building management as a responsible, educated professional who simply had a strong affection for cats. Have you ever wondered what disturbing activities might be occurring behind the carefully maintained facades of neighbors who appear completely normal and trustworthy in your community? Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.